The announcement by Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom to officially recognize Palestinian statehood marks a watershed moment in global diplomacy and a dramatic shift in the foreign policy of three nations that have long been closely aligned with the United States and Israel on Middle Eastern affairs. This move is being described not just as a symbolic gesture, but as a calculated step toward reshaping the geopolitical landscape, raising questions about timing, motivations, and implications for both the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader international order. To fully understand the impact of this recognition, it is essential to look at the political backdrop, the evolving positions of these countries, and how this decision interacts with global and regional power balances for decades. The recognition of a Palestinian state has been a contested issue in international politics, while over 140 United Nations member states have already extended formal recognition. Most Western powers, particularly those closely aligned with Washington, refrain from doing so, instead advocating a negotiated two-state solution to be reached directly between Israelis and Palestinians. The decision by Canada, Australia, and the UK therefore stands out, not just because of the countries themselves, but because it signals a break in what was once a unified Western front in support of Israel's position. It highlights how shifts in domestic politics, global opinion, and regional crises are forcing long-standing allies of the U.S. to recalibrate their approaches. Looking first at Canada, its historical stance has generally leaned toward maintaining a balance between supporting Israel's security and acknowledging Palestinian aspirations. But successive governments, particularly under Stephen Harper, were heavily criticized for siding too closely with Israel. The current Canadian government has been under increasing domestic and international pressure to adopt a more balanced policy, especially in light of the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, mounting civilian casualties, and the global outcry against ongoing Israeli military campaigns. Recognition of Palestine can be seen as a way for Canada to signal its independence in foreign policy, while responding to its citizens' growing calls for justice and accountability in the conflict. Australia's decision is equally significant, given its long-standing alignment with Washington on foreign policy matters and its historically cautious approach to Middle Eastern issues. Australia has often been reluctant to take steps that might be perceived as undermining Israel, but in recent years, internal debates within its political establishment have highlighted the need to stand on the side of human rights and international law. Recognition of Palestine serves as both a domestic political win for a government seeking to demonstrate its commitment to justice and a strategic move to position itself more prominently as an independent voice on global issues beyond its traditional reliance on U.S. policy frameworks. The UK's recognition perhaps carries the most historical weight, given Britain's colonial legacy in Palestine and its role in shaping the early trajectory of the conflict through the Balfour Declaration and subsequent Mandate administration. For years, successive British governments have avoided unilateral recognition, insisting it should come only as part of a negotiated settlement. However, the deteriorating situation on the ground, international frustration with the lack of progress in peace talks, and rising domestic political pressures have converged to make recognition an attractive and even necessary policy option. For London, the move also signals a desire to reassert global relevance in a post-Brexit world by taking a leadership role in pressing for peace and justice in one of the world's longest-running conflicts. From a performance perspective, the joint recognition by these three nations amplifies their diplomatic leverage. Each country could have made the announcement alone, but by coordinating, they have given the decision greater symbolic weight and demonstrated a united front that could encourage other Western nations to follow suit. This trilateral approach not only multiplies the visibility of the move, but also protects each government domestically by framing the decision as part of a collective shift rather than a unilateral gamble. In terms of diplomatic design, the joint timing was carefully planned to maximize political effect while underscoring the urgency of addressing Palestinian aspirations for self-determination. One of the most important elements of this recognition is its signaling effect toward both Israel and the United States. Israel has long relied on strong Western allies to back its positions at international forums such as the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly. By losing Canada, Australia, and the UK on this issue, Israel faces growing isolation even within its traditional bloc of friends. This could complicate its diplomatic efforts, particularly at a time when global outrage over military operations in Gaza and the West Bank is mounting. For the United States, which has consistently shielded Israel, this development places Washington in an increasingly lonely position, forced to defend a stance that is now being openly challenged by some of its closest allies. The recognition by these three countries could therefore serve as a wake-up call to Washington that its position on the conflict is no longer sustainable among its peers. On the Palestinian side, this recognition carries profound symbolic and practical benefits. Symbolically, it validates decades of struggle for statehood and acknowledges the Palestinian people's right to self-determination under international law. Practically, it strengthens Palestine's diplomatic standing, potentially opening the door to deeper bilateral relations, trade agreements, and enhanced participation in international institutions. It could also provide Palestinian leaders with renewed legitimacy at home and abroad, particularly as divisions between different factions have weakened internal cohesion. The recognition might not immediately change realities on the ground, but it injects momentum into the Palestinian cause at a time when despair and frustration have been at their highest levels. Critics argue, however, that recognition without concrete pressure on Israel could amount to little more than symbolism. Israel has shown repeatedly that it is willing to ignore international criticism when it comes to settlement expansion, military campaigns, and policies of occupation, unless recognition is paired with practical measures such as sanctions. Restrictions on military cooperation or legal accountability mechanisms' impact may remain limited. Nevertheless, even as symbolism, it exerts moral pressure and shifts the discourse, making it increasingly difficult for Israel and its allies to dismiss Palestinian statehood as unrealistic or premature. From a design perspective, the way this announcement was framed matters greatly. The governments of Canada, Australia, and the UK emphasized that recognition was not meant to delegitimize Israel, but to reaffirm support for a two-state solution as the only viable path toward lasting peace. This careful framing was aimed at countering accusations of bias, while still taking a firm step toward justice. It shows an awareness of the delicate balance between addressing domestic constituencies supportive of Palestinian rights and maintaining strategic ties with Israel and the United States. By positioning the recognition as a pro-peace move rather than an anti-Israel move, the three countries sought to maximize legitimacy and minimize backlash. Unique selling points of this recognition include its collective nature, its timing in the midst of heightened conflict and humanitarian crisis, and its departure from decades of Western hesitation. Unlike earlier recognitions by other nations, this move comes from countries that cannot be dismissed as hostile to Israel by default. Each of these nations has a long record of close relations with Israel, strong military and intelligence ties with the United States, and established reputations as responsible players in the international community. This gives their recognition added credibility and weight, making it harder to ignore. It also marks a rare moment of Western divergence from U.S. leadership, which could open the door for a broader rethinking of how Western alliances operate in the 21st century. The broader implications of this recognition extend beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For one, it highlights the growing willingness of middle powers to chart their own course on global issues, even when this diverges from Washington's preferences. Canada, Australia, and the UK may not be superpowers, but their decisions carry global influence, particularly in multilateral forums. Secondly, this recognition could accelerate a broader rebalancing of global opinion toward Palestine, encouraging other hesitant countries in Europe, Asia, and Latin America to follow suit. Thirdly, it underscores how public opinion amplified through mass protests, civil society campaigns, and media coverage can eventually push governments to take steps once considered too controversial at the same time. The recognition raises difficult questions. Will it change realities on the ground for Palestinians living under occupation, blockade, and daily violence? Will it lead to renewed negotiations? Or will it harden positions on both sides? How will Israel respond diplomatically and militarily to what it perceives as betrayal by long-standing allies? And perhaps most critically, will the United States adapt to this new reality or double down on its current position, thereby risking further isolation? These questions remain open, but the very fact that they are now being asked reflects how the recognition has already reshaped the conversation in terms of performance assessment. The move delivers political gains at home for leaders who have faced mounting public criticism for inaction in the face of humanitarian disaster. It demonstrates responsiveness to popular sentiment and allows governments to present themselves as champions of justice and peace. Internationally, it boosts credibility among nations that have long criticized Western double standards, yet the performance is not without risks. Leaders must contend with potential diplomatic backlash from Israel and the United States, accusations of undermining peace prospects, and possible economic or security repercussions. Balancing these risks with the moral and political benefits is a delicate act, but one that all three governments appear prepared to manage. The long-term design element here is about building a framework for a just peace. Recognition is a foundational step, but it must be followed by sustained diplomatic engagement, pressure on all parties to return to negotiations, and accountability for violations of international law. Without these follow-up measures, recognition risks being dismissed as a hollow gesture. However, if leveraged properly, it can be the starting point for a renewed push toward a genuine two-state solution, even if that solution currently appears distant. Ultimately, the recognition of Palestinian statehood by Canada, Australia, and the UK is not just about Palestine. It is about the credibility of international law, the resilience of global diplomacy, and the willingness of states to stand up for principles even when inconvenient. It reflects a world where public opinion matters, where middle powers assert independence, and where old alignments are no longer taken for granted. Whether this leads to tangible progress for Palestinians remains to be seen, but it has already shifted the dynamics of debate and forced the world to confront the reality that Palestinian statehood is no longer a marginal issue but a central demand of our time.